Good night, everybody. And first of all, I want to thank Father Stephen and the Dominican community for inviting me here. It's a great privilege to be here to just share some thoughts with you and also then to have some conversations and so on. I suppose before I begin or move into the topic, I would like just to add my own small voice really of tribute to the Dominicans here in Ennismore over many years and all the fantastic work that has been done here and that no doubt will continue to bear fruit into the future. It's a sad time in a way, I think, that it's closing because the service to so many people, you know, in the faith community and beyond the faith community and people on the margins, and even in the last few weeks meeting people around the city and talking to people, not just young people but people, middle-aged people and people nearly the same age as myself who have very happy memories of coming to Ennismore for retreats or workshops or seminars or adult faith formation. Wonderful experience of grace here. And I myself, even as a young man and even as a novice, I remember coming to St. Dominic's to listen to some great Dominicans, Jerome Murphy O'Connor and Ambrose McNichol. Carla Spoor was another man I remember from Holland, Margaret McCurtain, and so many other speakers, lay and religious over the years, that enriched the lives of so many people. So I know it's a difficult time for the friars here and for the community, and just to know that our prayers are very much with you during this time, and also my own belief that even when something seems to stop in its own way, that it bears fruit and it continues to bear fruit, and the work that has been going on here will continue to bear fruit in people's hearts and in people's lives well into the future. So I just wanted to say that at the beginning to the Dominican community. Thank you so much. There's a story told about a bishop a number of years back who was preaching at confirmation ceremonies, you know, and in the front row there was parents, mother and father, and 4 or 5 kids, including the youngest kid who was only about 4 or 5 years old. And the bishop was preaching what he thought was a very erudite homily and was doing very well. And he noticed that the youngest child was very, very fidgety and disruptive, and he was a little distracted by him, you know. And then, miracle of miracles, the mother opened her bag and she took out something and she passed it down to the little child. You see, it was a calculator, something to keep him busy, you see. So Bishop thought this was great because the child was now busy, and he continued with this great homily. But then about 2 minutes later, he looked again, and there was the child aiming the thing at him, trying to switch stations. So if I get that signal from any of you tonight, I will realise that you should be at home watching the soccer. Stephen told you a bit about myself. I'm a Cork man. I'm a Presentation Brother. I grew up in the parish of Ballyfihan. I went to school in Turner's Cross in Creasree, where I met the Presentation Brothers. I suppose my vocation was because of that contact. But actually, even when I was 12 years old, my father had a very serious illness. And because I was the eldest in my family, my parents were young parents at the time, I was 12, 13, and I realised how serious it was. Thank God, after about 18 months he recovered, and he lived to be 89, he only died a few years ago. But I kind of realised early on that I wanted to do something with my life where I was helping people, and I wouldn't have put the words of vocation or religious life on it, but I think that was the start to something. And then I was always interested in education and so on, and that kind of led me into my second family, which was the Presentation family, and so here I am. Our topic tonight is like forming leaders for a synodal church. So what I'm going to talk about really is a little bit of personal sharing about my own experience of leadership, different leadership roles I've been in, and what I learned from that, and the mistakes I made in that, and what I learned from some of those. And then I'm going to talk a bit about what I think is the vision of Pope Francis for a synodal church, drawing very much on some interviews he's given and some books that have been written about it, and trying to paraphrase those in a sense. And then, just to make it very practical, at the end I'll talk a bit about some of the work that I'm involved in myself with young people and young adults and so on in Cork, in terms of trying to develop leadership and so on. I say this like that, clearly the future is very, very different, and the type of leadership that's needed and called for in a synodal church will be quite different. And forming people for the skills that will be required will be a big challenge. Like when you look around the world, whether it's in the political area or the social area or the cultural area or the religious area or the sporting area, it would seem that because of the pace of change and the stress that's going on, that systems generally are failing people. And we have great examples of really poor leadership at the political level when we turn on our televisions and look at what's going on around the world, with disastrous consequences. And I'm just taking that as one example. And when we come across good leadership, we know it intuitively. Now, I don't want you to think of leadership in terms of like the president or the Taoiseach or the bishop or the pope. I see all of us as being called to leadership, all of us as Christians. All of you in your lives, in your communities, in your families, in your parishes, in different ways, you use your gifts to put them at the service of others. So we're all called to that kind of leadership. And what Pope Francis is talking about is a synodal church where everybody is listened to, everybody is included, and the various gifts are used. A couple of years ago, on a wet October morning, I stood outside the church of San Damiano in Assisi and doing the little Franciscan pilgrimage there in Assisi with some friends. And because we were very early, the church was still closed. And we sheltered in the rain outside, a couple of us there. We had one or two umbrellas, so everybody was kind of huddled together in the rain. And I was in leadership in the Presentation Brothers at the time, and one of my colleagues turned to me and looked me straight in the eye and said, "Martin, you must ask yourself the question, why has God called you to this leadership at this stage in your life?" And for me it was a very challenging question, and a kind of an epiphany moment that stayed with me for a long time. And I was very conscious that the question was posed to me at the door of San Damiano, where Francis experienced Jesus from the cross saying to him, "Rebuild my church." You know the story of Francis and so on. "Rebuild my church, which has fallen into ruins." Okay? And that was the call in Francis' time. It's not much different now, really, you know. "Rebuild my church, which has fallen into ruins." And so I'll talk a little bit about my experience of leadership. I know that the great Dominican former master Timothy Radcliffe said a few years ago that courageous leadership is the greatest need in the church today. And like again now, when I say church, don't think just about the Pope or whatever, think about yourselves. At local level, we need courageous leadership. We need to utilise the gifts of everyone and give everybody their space. What I would say about my own experience of leadership, for first of all, for us as Christians, as Catholics, whatever, it's based on faith, you know. It's not a leadership which is about power or which is about ego or whatever. It's based on faith. It's based on a sense of call, and therefore there's a need for a team of people, for a supportive community. And I think what I do as a leader flows from who I am as a person. That's very much something that I would have learned. So when I was in leadership, I found myself having to face my own kind of fragility, my own inadequacy, my own shadow, and I simply discovered that I kind of had to pray in order to survive. And for me, as a presentation brother that time, I came to appreciate more and more the value of a supportive team, a supportive community, the value of spiritual accompaniment, we might call it, or spiritual direction. Now, that sounds like a grand term, but it can be in the ordinary sense. It doesn't always have to be professional spiritual direction, although there's a place for that, but it can be in the ordinary sense of having somebody that you can talk to about the life of the Spirit and about your life's journey and so on. I found myself as well having to work with my own humanity. And I think it was the writer Daniel O'Leary who said a few years ago that the challenge for leaders today in the church is to trust the holiness of the human heart, to take seriously the incarnation, to trust humanity and to empower people. To lead as Jesus led meant constantly trying to be authentic. And that's a struggle, you know. We don't succeed all the time. Say, practice what you preach, lead by example, but that's very difficult. You know, the great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung said one time that we are not singular, we're plural. There's many different people within us, and he says wherever within the psyche there is constellated a major yes, there's also a little bit of the psyche saying no. Okay? So like two people in love and they're going to get married and they're convinced they want to commit to each other for life and so on, and they're majorly going for this. Somewhere in the psyche there's often a little bit saying, oh, I'm not so sure about this, or I'll give up my freedom, whatever. So we're not singular, we're plural. And in trying to be authentic, we have to cope with our shadow, we have to cope with our inadequacy, we have to cope with our sinful side at times as well, and therefore the need for the Lord. And I suppose in Ignatian spirituality they talk about freedom, a freedom which all of us lack at times, you know. Because as a leader, sometimes it's easier to slip into a control mode rather than work out of a deeper essence, you know. Like, if any of you have an education background, either in school as teachers or parents, you know that kind of an organisation. It's a daily miracle of how a large school happens and so on. And I remember when I was a young teacher, I always felt, well, somebody else knows how this system works, like the deputy principal or the principal or whatever. And as I went up the line myself, I discovered, like, you know, that they don't, they're coping with their own inadequacy as well. In the school I was in, people used to say, who's in charge? Well, I discovered at one time, says I'm in charge, and if there's some trouble, there's me they're coming to, and so on, you know. Great story from New York about a famous school in Harlem, an African-American area of New York, where there was a lot of poverty one time, and the Frederick Douglass High School. And this woman, African-American woman, took it over, and within 4 or 5 years brought it from way down here to being one of the best public schools in the US, you know. And again, because of her authenticity as a person, her service model of leadership, her ability to engage with people, to listen to people and so on, and it transformed the place. And I think these are the kind of leaders that are required in a synodal church. One of the great graces of my life has been the 30-day retreat, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And I think that helped me to be aware of stuff within myself. It helped me at least to come to terms with that. And when I was in leadership then, they use the word all the time, noticing, awareness. Just being aware makes you a little bit better at how you deal with situations and with people. And if you know anything about the 30-day retreat, we might talk about it later, it's kind of based over, you know, Ignatius put together the spiritual exercises, and the first week, it's not always a calendar week, is a whole set of reflections on God's love for us, and then our brokenness, our sinfulness. The second week is following Jesus through the Gospels, a lot of meditations on the Gospels, and making a decision to be a disciple, choosing Christ. The third week then goes into the passion, the suffering, passion of Christ as it's going on in the world today and in my life. And the fourth week, of course, is resurrection and all that. And the final contemplatio ad amorem, the contemplation on the love of God, where Ignatius would see God's love at work everywhere, graces everywhere, and so on. But that experience of my life, which I did twice, I did it as a young man and I did it when I was a lot older, I think helped form me and my own spirituality for leadership, and just made me a little bit more aware of how to deal with situations and with people. And I would have discovered then in lots of situations in life, but I just talk about the church situation at times, or the religious situation, that type of leadership is often sadly lacking, and it's badly needed. Some of the learnings I had would be as follows. It's very difficult to lead if you're excessively afraid. Now, we all have fear, but if it's excessive fear, it's not of the good spirit. It's the bad spirit dragging us down, draining us of energy. Fear can block the grace of leadership, and people around you will catch that anxiety. So I think as a leader, and I'd say this to you as leaders in your families, whether you're a parent or a grandparent, or in your work situations, or in your communities, or in other organizations you work in, we need to constantly pray for courage, coming back to the earlier point about the need for courageous leadership. Secondly, it is difficult to lead when you are resentful or angry. Now, if you've been a principal in school, you will know that from 8:15 until 9 o'clock every morning, people will line up to tear strips off you, basically to give out about all kinds of things going wrong. You can't take it personally, that's just the nature of people working under pressure to get jobs done. So I always said to people, I want critical feedback. Now, there's a distinction between critical feedback and negative feedback. If they're just attacking you as a person, that's not good. But if they're criticizing out of love of the organization, the community, the church, whatever, that's really important, critical feedback. And leaders must be able to receive that. And if the leader retreats into himself or herself, unable to receive that, the whole system gets blocked. And I've seen that happen as well. So when we are very resentful or angry, we just pray for the grace to let go. Third thing would be, it's difficult to lead when you lose your passion. And you see, in many church situations, because of all we've gone through, there's almost been a collective loss of nerve, there's been a draining of energy, demoralization, for obvious reasons, and for good reasons and so on. But somehow we have to restore passion and enthusiasm, because it's not about us, it's about how the Lord works through history. And that word enthusiasm, the Greek is entheos, to be in God. If we're rooted in God, we look at the bigger picture of what's going on. Because confidence is infectious, there's no doubt about it. Here's another one. I think I found it difficult to lead when I was too safe or too cautious. And frequently I was too safe and too cautious because I was afraid. But somehow you have to pray for openness to growth. Now, you can hear me telling my story, but I want you to think about your story. Family situations, parish situations, work situations, and how do any of these points apply to you? It's very easy to think about Pope Francis, you see, and say he should do this or that or the other, but to think about ourselves as leaders and so on. Another thing is being really present to people is really important, and listening to them. That's a real gift, real presence. From your own experience in life, in relationships and friendships and family and so on, people that have really listened to you, just help you grow. Not that they tell you what to do, but they're just there for you. They listen to you. It's a great gift of a leader, you know. And it's a great gift to give to young people, not to be judgmental, but just to listen to them. And like I remember, I was talking to Father Joe earlier about the Caribbean, the West Indies, and Dominicans are there, of course, and Presidential Brothers are there as well. I went out as a young fella to the West Indies, and the clue, I landed in the island of Grenada just before Christmas, and I went up to the school, and there had been a Christmas play on the night before, and they were cleaning up the school, and they just put me into a hall with about 80 young West Indians to entertain them for an hour or two while the place was being cleaned up. I didn't know what to do. But then there was a famous brother there, Leonard Dennehy from North Cork. He brought me down to the brother's house, and to my great surprise and delight, because I had travelled a long way, he produced a beautiful, full Irish breakfast, and then he just sat and listened to me for about 2 hours. You know, I never forgot that. So I think the gift of listening is important. And then for all of us as Christians, as Catholics as well, the kind of contemplative dimension, the prayer dimension, you know. Where I live in the Mardyke House, and we have a little small conference centre at the back of the house, which we've just renovated. We're literally adjacent to UCC, so a lot of student stuff goes on there. But we had a blessing and opening on Saturday, and it was opened by An Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, and he was very much at home when he spoke to the young people at some length and shared a lot with them. But one of the things he talked about was the pressure in political life today to make quick decisions. You know, that something trends on social media for 24 hours and you're just thrown in to make a quick decision. And if you don't make a quick decision, you're accused as a politician of dithering or whatever, you know. And he said, it's not good. We don't have enough reflective spaces. We don't have enough space for time out and for reflection and so on. And I think for us as Christians, that's what we would talk about in terms of prayer and the contemplative dimension and building that into our lives. And of course then, if you're in any kind of leadership role, whether it's again to this family, community, parish, wherever, if you don't have a supportive and encouraging atmosphere, it makes leadership very difficult. So the need for community. Now, all of that is just a few things from my personal experience. But I would say that what I'm sharing with you there is kind of at the heart of what Pope Francis is talking about when he talks about a synodal church, those qualities. Terms like synodality tend to frighten people away. You have to break them down into what does that mean in practice. When you're at the checkout in Tesco's, you won't buy any books, you won't see any books for sale on synodality. They're not great bestsellers, you won't have them for light bedside reading. But if you talk to people about listening and sharing and respect and tolerance and inclusion and so on, people will want to talk about those things, you know. So like that's what we have to translate it to. We've come through a terrible time in many ways in terms of COVID and the war in Ukraine now and the climate emergency and the cost of living crisis. Life is tough for so many people, particularly people who are sick, you know, and coping with that. I just heard of a man today who already had lung cancer and now has had a stroke, you know. And like it just, when you hear that, so many people are suffering in so many ways. Our Christian faith doesn't give us easy answers, and words are easy. It doesn't give us easy answers, but as Christians we believe in a God of love, and even at the darkest moments we believe that eventually good will triumph, and that love is eternal, and that love conquers even death itself. There was a small little book last year. Pope Francis gave an interview to a journalist, Austin Ivory. You know him? You know the book? The book was called Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future. And in it, Francis kind of outlines his vision for the world and indeed for the church. And I'll just share a few thoughts on that. First of all, the language in the book, small little book. Language in the book. Anybody read it? How many people know the book I'm talking about? Yeah. He speaks to the reality of people's lives today. Now, if you've ever seen him on television or whatever, you know Pope Francis. I had the privilege briefly one time of meeting him for a few minutes. And he's a very warm, kind of engaging personality, you know. I was in Rome for some conference of religious superiors, and we got these, what they call Bacciamano tickets, which means that you get in the front row at the audience and you get actually to shake hands with him, you know. And there's about 30,000 people at the audience, like what's like being in the Hogan stand in Croke Park, you get to the front row. And that morning, married couples in Rome, if they get married in Rome, can go to the audience on Wednesday and meet the Pope. And past popes then, there'd be 50 or 100 married couples, they would do one big photograph with them, you know. But of course, Francis, being Francis, insisted on meeting them individually, so this delayed everything. And by the time he got to us, it was the end of a long morning. But he kind of looks you in the eye, and he uses this phrase all the time, pray for me, you know. And I must say, since I kind of met him personally, I have kind of taken that seriously. I do pray for him, you know. Sometimes people ask you to pray for them, you say, oh yeah, I'll pray for you, but you forget about it after a few days. But I have kind of tried to keep that up, to pray for him, and God knows he needs it. But he, in the book anyway, it's based on several interviews he gave to this British journalist. He gave them in Spanish, and Austin Ivory then translated them into English, but the book was published with the Pope's approval. And he spoke about the path to a better future. He had 3 sections: a time to see, a time to choose, and a time to ask. And like, you could apply this to your life now. What are you seeing in your life at the moment? What have you been asked? What are you choosing? And then what are you going to act, and what are you going to do? Now, as I mentioned earlier, Pope Francis is a Jesuit. He was a member of the Society of Jesus, Jesuit order, founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola. And I suppose the central teaching of Ignatian spirituality is to find God in all things. So I think to understand Francis, his personal spirituality, and to understand his vision for the church, and to understand his project for a synodal church, you have to begin to understand his Jesuit background. That finding God in all things, that grace is at work in the world, God is at work in the world. So it's not a kind of a fuga mundi theology where you retreat from the world, you know, and condemn it, the world, the flesh and the devil, nothing to do with that. It's where you engage with the world, you get your hands dirty in the service of people. The church is a field hospital, you know, for the wounded, and you get out there and you work with people, whether they be people of faith or people of no formal faith, but you work with people of goodwill to build a better world. And he challenges us in the book to face the reality of today, to see love and goodness at work in the world, to see God in the reality, and then to follow through in our Christian lives. Pope Francis says that suffering and crisis leads to change. But he poses the question, what kind of change will come? Will it be change for the better or for the worse? And the book was published during the time of COVID. And he talks about personal COVIDs in his own life. Times in his own life when he had dramatic experience of crisis or suffering and the change that came out of it. And the first one was in 1957 when he was 21 years old. And he nearly died on the operating table when he was having serious surgery for the removal of part of the lung, and his recovery from that, and how that changed him. The second personal COVID he talked about was 2 years, 1990 to 1992. He was now in his 50s. He had finished as provincial of the Jesuit order in Argentina. It had been a very difficult time for him as provincial, because the entire all of Argentina was under a military dictatorship. The Jesuit order was very divided at the time, and many of his brother Jesuits rejected him and some of the stances he took. He does admit that as a younger man his style was too authoritarian. He admits to his own faults as well. He's not saying he was blameless, but he ended up in a rather difficult place when he went out of leadership. And for the period of 1990 to 92, he went to the city of Cordoba, a city in the mountains of central Argentina, in a kind of internal exile, he says. And he uses the phrase in Spanish, which we would say, he says, I was sent off the pitch like a player that's sent off the pitch. Literally, the Jesuits moved him out of the way, you know. But this was a very rich time spiritually for him. He prayed, he wrote, and he read a lot in those 2 years. And incidentally, he tells us in the book, one of the things he read was a multi-volume study on the history of the popes. I don't know whether he had any ideas at that stage or not, but that must have been helpful to him later on anyway. But that was one of the things he read. But he now sees that time in exile in Cordoba as a very rich period in his life. And he sees how God used that time and the suffering to prepare him for his future work. Now, the whole point in Pope Francis sharing his personal COVID stories is to get us to reflect on suffering and loss experiences in our own lives. All of you have had griefs and loss experiences in your own life. We've had the experience of COVID, but you've also had other types of really difficult experiences in your own life. And now to try to see, where was God present in that? Or what did I learn from that? Or how did I come out of that? And how can God bring good out of times of even extreme tribulation? And Francis really encourages us, not to be broken by that, but if we can, to come out of it and to reach out and to help others. And then the book contains many other things, but it contains a brilliant critique of systems and ideologies in the world today and the crisis facing our world. There's stuff in it about global economies obsessed with profit at all costs, economic and political systems that are heedless of people and of the environment, and politicians who ferment fear and division. It's very, very relevant. Pope Francis, I think, sees himself as a kind of a spiritual companion to people today. Like in the Jesuit tradition of spiritual accompaniment, spiritual direction, you meet with a director who is your companion, like your anam cara in Irish, and this person, he or she, is to help you get in touch with God. Once the spiritual director helps you get in touch with God, the director should get out of the way, because then it's between God and you. But he kind of sees himself as a spiritual companion. It's a typically Jesuit kind of thing, as a spiritual director to the world today. Not so much in telling people what to do, but in walking with people as a brother, helping people to encounter God's love. And he asks us to have faith that God is in charge. It's very hard to have faith, I think, for many people in the world today when we see the triumph of evil in so many ways. But to have faith that God is in charge. So he talks a lot in the book about connection, encounter, breaking down barriers between peoples, not retreating into isolation or narrow self-interest. And the whole thing then of regaining hope. And he talks about personal and communal action to help us live through the present crisis. He says we need to place human dignity, not profit, at the centre of all economic systems. We must redesign the economy so that it can offer every person access to a dignified existence while protecting and regenerating the environment. And we must place the needs of poor and suffering people at the centre of all these decisions and processes. So that's at the big level, if you like, in terms of what governments, societies and citizens must do if we are to recover hope. But Francis also addresses a personal invitation to each of us. He calls each of us to personal conversion. He says, move out of yourself, connect with others. And when I was talking to people during COVID, it was as simple as phoning people, talking to them, helping in any way you can, making an extra effort, putting yourself out, offering your gifts in service in whatever way you can, doing one extra practical thing. Francis recognizes that people are doing so much already, but he calls us to go the extra mile at this time. Pope Francis believes that people acting together can make a real difference and lead to new possibilities and new hope for people and for the planet. There's a guy in the United States, in MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Otto Scharmer, and he's written a lot of stuff. But basically, one of his big things is this, and I believe it's true. He says, information alone will not change us. I'm not saying that information is not important. I mean, you study, you learn, you get all the data and so on. And when I work with young people, I'd always encourage them to do their best and to study and so on. But Chalmers says information alone will not change us. It is what we do that changes us. It is the practices we take on every day that will change us. And I think Pope Francis' vision is to go from not just giving people information, but to taking on daily practices. Again, it's a Jesuit thing. Spiritual exercises. Do you know what I mean? It's exercise, like physical exercise. It's something you do every day. There's a great book for you can use it with young adults called the Ignatian Workout. And it's like, do you know the way young people go to a gym for physical exercise? Well, this is for spiritual exercise. And Francis is very much on that idea that is what you do in practice that counts. So we all know his speeches about he wanting the church to be a field hospital where the wounded are taken care of. He wants pastors to know the smell of the sheep and so on. So I think that he brings that to the process today as a person of deep faith and prayer. And he calls us to pray too, to know God's love in a deep personal way. And this enriches the human journey and helps us to face even life's greatest challenges. Because I think for Francis, the ultimate hope lies in Christ's love for us. So, like what I've been saying there, from my own experience of leadership, a few thoughts that have helped me, and then from the writings of Pope Francis, what really is central to his kind of vision of the Christian life. And all of that comes together in his desire to promote a synodal church, a church which is inclusive, a church which respects, which listens, which develops the gifts of everybody. And you can write big books of theology about this, and they're being produced now by the New Time on synodality. But it comes down really to everybody in their own situation taking on practices which will transform the way we lead people and which will transform the way we live Christian community. And there are huge obstacles to that. Nobody is expecting this to be easy. But each of us in our own way can take action and can do things which in our own place, whether it's home, family, parish, local community, religious community, in context with people, can make a difference, you know. We sometimes argue about the big things, you know, but we miss the simple things. I was in school in Nigeria a couple of years back doing a staff day with young Nigerian teachers, men and women. It was in the northern part of Nigeria, the state of Bauchi, in a place called Tafawa Balewa, and a small Christian community, about 5%, in a predominantly Islamic area. The school was open, presentation schools was open to girls and boys, it was open to Muslims and Christians, all getting on very well together. Unfortunately, in that area of Nigeria, there is a terrorist Islamist group called Boko Haram. You may have heard of them. They kidnap hundreds of girls there at Chibok and so on, and they create havoc because they literally burn and kill and destroy. In theory, they say they're against Western education, but in practice, they're against the education of women. So any school with girls will be a target. And in our school, a little girl, 14-year-old girl called Navina James, was shot dead going home from school one day by Boko Haram as a warning to other girls not to go to school. So that's the kind of place you're working in. I was doing a staff day with these young Nigerian teachers, you know, and I kind of very simple. I said, okay, tell me about your school now, the advantages, the disadvantages, okay? Then imagine your school in 5 years' time and tell me what you want it to be like, the great things you're going to do in 5 years' time. And now tell me how you go from A to B, how you go from now to 5 years' time. And I guarantee you, if I did that exercise anywhere in Europe or in the Western world, going from A to B would mean more resources and more money and better buildings and better facilities and all the rest of it. And no doubt that's part of it, like I'm not denying that. But the first thing they put on their list in terms of going from A to B was, we must be kinder to each other. As a staff, we must be kinder to each other, And maybe for the whole church, whether you're on the right or left or in the extreme centre, you must be kinder to each other, And I abhor some of the extremism and commentary that you see on social media at times from Catholics, but other Catholics and so on. It's just not of the gospel. It can't be. And whether people are of the right, the centre, or the left, I'm not too tied up with that myself. It's by their fruits you shall know them. It's by how the gospel is being lived and how the vision is being implemented in practice. I mean, some of the extreme criticism of Pope Francis that's coming from the United States, is malevolent. It's beyond valid criticism, which every pope has to take that. But this is really something beyond, and it's well funded and it's extreme. So, I think we have to avoid that kind of thing in the church and try to have a dialogue where people are really listened to and so on. I think we live in a very exciting time. I mean, I would have great hope. It's not about having naive optimism because the problems are immense, but God is at work, and out of the chaos comes something new and hopefully something better. There's a great book written now about 40 years ago by a Scottish Jesuit, Jerry Hughes, God of Surprises. It's been reissued many times. They've just reissued it again, actually, because people continue to read it. And there's a line in there where he talks about Christians and he says, "We believe in a kingdom that grows most vigorously when everything seems hopeless." We believe in a kingdom that grows most vigorously when everything seems hopeless. So my thing to people, I say to myself, is do all the good you can where you are with the people you're serving as best you can according to your lights now, and leave the greater thing then to God and the work of the Spirit. Because if you get sucked into depression and negativity and so on, it's going to suck the life out of us, and we're not going to be people of the gospel. And if we lose a kind of a joy that should be part of the life, we've lost something really precious. I'm going to conclude now because, again, translating it into practice, I work in a project with young people on trying to develop leaders for whatever will be there in the future in terms of church or synodal church or whatever. And we're mainly working with young adults because we're near the university. We collaborate a lot with the chaplaincy at UCC, chaplaincy team there, great team, and also with various initiatives in the Diocese of Cork and Ross and with other groups in the community. And we call it the LEAF Project, Leadership, Education and Formation. And my young confrere here now, Simon, not putting any pressure on you, Simon, but he's a bit of a techie that I'm not. I'm a kind of I'm lost with all this stuff. He's going to show you a video. It's about 8 minutes, but it gives an idea of the work we're doing, and then we'll break and chat and all the rest, okay? So it's just 3 little clips from a longer video where we talk about the work we do with young adults, and mainly that some of the young adults talk themselves about their own involvement in it and what they're learning from it, and about their faith story and so on. And again, this is something that's just evolved with us in the last couple of years, and it has been one of the great graces. This is a great view of where we live in the Mardyke. You'll see the rest of the city there as well. So that's it, Simon, go and make sure some people can hear. Hello, welcome to the Edmund Rice Centre, Mardyke House, Cork, the home of the LEAF Project. The Leadership, Education and Formation Project is an initiative of the Presentation Brothers, and we work with young people, young adults and various groups in the community trying to develop leadership. We believe in the God-given gifts of each person, and our hope is to accompany and journey with young people as they develop their leadership skills, and put these skills at the service of the community and the service of society.
The work of the LEAF project is essential in today's day and age as it helps to form young adults and individuals to live out their authentic calling to service through leadership. At the heart of the Mardyke is a community of brothers who live and pray together. We also have the Edmund Rice Centre at the back of the house where we host different groups that come in for different courses, workshops, retreats from our different schools and from the diocese.
I first came in contact with the Presentation Brothers here in Mardyke House when I began my role as Assistant Chaplain in University College Cork. We had our training team day together here in Mardyke House, which Brother Martin led, and it was really just a great day to come together as a team and to orientate ourselves to figure out what our true goals were and to come into agreement with each other.
I first met the Presentation Brothers through the Connect events and meetings we held with the diocese. And then again, when I joined the chaplaincy team, we came here for our training days and received some training with Brother Martin, which was really beneficial to our team, just to bring us all together at the start when we joined and build that team bond through the spirit that's present here at Presentation Brothers.
Mardyke House as a presentation community of brothers has been a great place of welcome and hospitality. In a very significant place in the middle of Cork, it has been a centre for so many of our gatherings over the last 3 years, bringing together different groups from throughout the diocese to listen, to share, to reflect. What we experienced there was always a great warmth and hospitality, and for that we're very grateful. And grateful going forward to be able to use the Edmund Rice Centre.
There are many different dimensions to leadership. Firstly, of course, there's the organisational element. People have to be good at the job they do. Then there's the relational element. That's linking with people and being able to work together and bring people with you. And also then, for people of faith, there's the spiritual element, having a vision and having a reason for doing what we're doing. And for us in the LEAF project, when we work with people and with young people, we try to develop all these elements. But particularly we believe that the Christian message brings something very important to the role of leadership today. Because for us as Catholic Christians, leadership is not about power or telling people what to do. It's about journeying with people and being servant leaders and being with them on the journey through life.
Brother Martin visited our school a couple of weeks ago, introducing us to the LEAF project, a project that encourages us to lead ourselves and try to learn more about leadership. The whole entire community learned a lot about how to be a leader. What we really enjoyed was the leadership maxims. One that particularly stuck with me was align your video with your audio, where you have to follow what you say by what you do.
Recently we had a leadership workshop for the President Committee, which is the 13 of us. We learned about the values of a leader, what we should do. I think the main ethos of that workshop was the lead yourself first. I think it's important to take responsibility for yourself before you lead a group. It puts you in a great position to take responsibility for an entire group, and then it can lead to some really good things happening within the group for this year.
What stayed with me really in terms of the workshop was it's not about you. So to be a leader, you shouldn't think of just yourself. You have to think of others, and it's all about everyone else around you. You have to inspire people, you have to help people to be a leader.
For me, being a good leader is about being a role model to all of the younger girls in our school and also helping those in our school community.
Our school motto, "Those who instruct many unto justice will shine like stars for all eternity," is something that we as leaders on the Student Council try to embody within our school and show courtesy, kindness and respect to others.
The LEAF project, particularly with Brother Martin, has been very instrumental in helping us to strengthen and form leadership in the diocese, working with our chaplains in UCC, our chaplains on pastoral care, in the hospitals, and with various different diocesan groups and different youth leaders. Our own priest council as well, Brother Martin has helped us in forming and facilitating many of the new movements within the priest council. Since I came here to Cork as Bishop of Cork-on-Ross at the end of June 2019, together with the priests, the religious and the people of the diocese, we've been trying to respond to Pope Francis' invitation to me coming here as Bishop to work with the people of the diocese towards a period of renewal. That renewal has taken various different forms, from our families of parishes, which we began this summer, trying to reorganise our parishes to collaborate more closely together and share resources, to working with young people, reaching out to those who have disconnected from their faith. The LEAF project have been very important collaborators in this, particularly in our work with the young people. We've had 2 Connect events, and Brother Martin and Brother Simon were part of a group of 18 different youth leaders from around the diocese who helped us to work together to bring together young people in UCC on 2 events to explore their faith, to support them and help them to respond to the questions of today in a challenging and difficult world.
Like many in Ireland, my faith journey began when I was a child. I was brought up in my Catholic faith, although over the years my faith kind of dulled. Fortunately, I got the opportunity to go to a U2000 retreat at the age of 16. And from there, my faith journey really started to begin. I looked at those around me who were also practicing as guides. I felt a deep yearning in my heart to know Jesus and to get closer to the church.
The Word of God, the Gospel and the readings tell us that those that are journeying closest to God at times may be on the most difficult of journeys. That certainly gives hope to myself, because life isn't always easy for any of us. The hope that our faith can get us through certain circumstances and to look beyond to the future is extremely important.
I suppose we think of faith sometimes as something just for the hard times, but I suppose there is such an element of community and spirit and joy and even crack that it brings, all joining together as a community.
I think the Christian message of leadership is to serve the people you are leading. You need to take care of them, they take care of you in return. Sometimes you're placed in that position and sometimes you put yourself forward for it. As part of Connect 2, each one of us attended a series of workshops which all helped us to understand our faith and become young missionary disciples.
Leadership to me means leading yourself first. If you don't lead yourself first, you can't be expected to lead others. That means acting with courage, humility and respect. Every day at the end of school we say a prayer to Blessed Edmund Rice. We are reminded by this prayer to show faith and generosity. And here in Preslink we are inspired by this, to show faith and generosity to those who are really in need in our community.
We believe in the God-given talents of each person and of each young person. And we have a really challenging situation at the moment with war in Ukraine, with the crisis of climate change, with so many people suffering because of the cost of living crisis. So there is a need for young people to develop their leadership skills. And we believe that the Christian message brings something really important to that process, with its focus on love and service and respect, and to developing and training leaders for the future. Leadership must lead by example, and in the work we do, we emphasize that very much. Leadership must also work hard at developing the skills of leadership. We always use the image of the L plate. To be a good leader, you must first listen, then you must learn a lot, and then you lead. And also because we work from a Catholic Christian perspective, we believe that a faith perspective brings something important to the task of leadership for those most in need. And that's very much at the heart of our presentation tradition, our Edmund Rice tradition, and certainly it's something we try to embody in everything we do with young people in the LEAF project. So basically there was 3 things there. Now, at the first part I shared a bit of my own journey with leadership and some of my own experiences and learning from failure. Then some insights from Pope Francis' vision for the church, for a synodal church. And then in our case how we're trying to implement that in practice with young people. So there were kind of lots of different things there. I suppose what you have to do really is reflect on your situation and take one or two things out of that and see how do you apply that to your own family, your own community, the people you interact with, and so on. Because the synodal church won't start in Rome, it'll start from where we are, you know. So I think now we go and do some conversations and talking, Stephen, is that right? Yeah.